She was only 19 when tragedy struck. A promising student, a loving daughter, a bright future ahead. One rainy evening, a violent accident changed everything, leaving her in a deep coma that would last 5 long years. Her family never gave up hope, staying by her side, waiting for a miracle that never came, until something even more unbelievable happened. Doctors were shocked. Nurses whispered in disbelief. The girl who had not moved, spoken, or opened her eyes in half a decade was suddenly pregnant. With no answers and growing suspicion, the hospital turned to one final option: a DNA test. What it revealed would not only shatter lives, but expose a dark secret hidden behind white walls and quiet hallways. This is a story that begins with silence, but builds toward a truth no one was ready for. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing our stories reach hearts across the world. This is another unforgettable tale from Mr. Edwards' Tales, where real emotion lives, and every story makes you see life in a different way. The rain had stopped an hour before, leaving a thin sheen of water across the cobblestone streets of Darlington. The air was damp and cold, but Evelyn Morrow didn't seem to notice. She clutched her notebook against her chest, her footsteps slow and careful as she walked home from the university library. Streetlights flickered above her, casting long shadows over puddles and reflecting golden halos on the slick ground. Her mind wandered, filled with notes on Victorian literature and the upcoming final exam. She barely heard the roar of the engine behind her. When the sound registered, it was too late. A massive delivery truck, swerving to avoid a fallen sign, barreled down the street. The headlights washed over her like a blinding wave. She turned, eyes wide with horror, just as the metal struck. Her body was thrown several feet before crashing to the pavement, her head hitting the ground with a sickening crack. The truck screeched to a halt, its driver leaping out, shouting for help. But Evelyn was already unconscious. Within minutes, paramedics arrived, her notebook still soaked and lying near the curb, pages fluttering in the wind. Her life, filled with ambition and promise, was suddenly reduced to silence. At Ashton Grace Regional Hospital, the emergency room buzzed with urgency. Nurses moved quickly, voices sharp and low. Dr. Silas Trent, the attending trauma physician, examined Evelyn as they wheeled her in, already stabilizing her vitals. Her skull had fractured upon impact. There was cerebral swelling, multiple contusions, and internal bruising. "We need a CT scan now," he barked, eyes focused, sweat dotting his temple. Miriam Morrow, Evelyn's mother, rushed in moments later, her face ashen, her breath caught in her chest. "Where is she? Where's—" "My daughter!" she cried, grabbing at the sleeve of a nurse who guided her to the waiting area. Her husband Ronald followed, holding her hand tightly, his own eyes glassy with shock. Hours passed. Dr. Trent finally emerged, removing his gloves with a grim sigh. "She's alive," he began, "but the trauma to her brain is severe. She's in a coma. We don't know when, or if, she'll wake up." Miriam collapsed into Ronald's arms. The hallway echoed with her muffled sobs. Talia Cross, Evelyn's closest friend, arrived soon after, still wearing her work apron from the campus cafe. She dropped it on the chair beside Miriam and sat silently, watching the clock, listening to the machines that now breathed for Evelyn. The days that followed were a blur of antiseptic smells, hushed footsteps, and restless prayers. Evelyn was transferred to the intensive care unit room 312, a sterile environment lit by cold fluorescent lights and dominated by the constant beep of monitors. Miriam refused to leave. She spent her days by Evelyn's side, reading aloud the books her daughter loved, whispering into her ear as if her voice could bridge the void. "Remember when we made lavender cookies and burned half the batch?" she'd say softly, brushing hair from Evelyn's brow. Talia visited every afternoon, always bringing something: a bouquet of violets, a note from one of their classmates, a new book to read aloud. She spoke in bright tones, as if determined to stir something inside Evelyn. "You owe me lunch, you know," she joked once, holding Evelyn's limp hand. "I'm not letting you get out of it just because you're napping for a year." But as weeks turned to months, the visits dwindled. Friends stopped coming. Professors sent flowers, then stopped calling. Only Talia remained consistent, and Miriam, gaunt now, with dark circles etched deep under her eyes, never moved from that bedside. The hospital staff began to refer to them as the loyal ones. Years crept by, cruel in their silence. Miriam had stopped working, relying on Ronald's modest pension and their dwindling savings. Talia, now, graduated and working at a local bookstore, never let a week pass without visiting. Evelyn's body remained unchanged, her skin pale, her hair trimmed neatly by a nurse, her eyes forever closed. Yet time seemed suspended in that room. Ashton Grace Hospital changed directors, repainted the halls, updated machines. But room 312 stayed the same. Nurse Carla Davenport, who had transferred to night shift duties 3 years ago, often paused outside Evelyn's door during rounds. Something about the girl haunted her. "She's too young to be like this," Carla once murmured to a new nurse, gently tucking the blanket around Evelyn's legs. But the medical team had given up on expecting miracles. Dr. Trent now avoided the room unless necessary. "She's stable," he'd say flatly. "Nothing's changed." Still, Miriam stayed. Still, Talia came. Still, Evelyn lay in a timeless sleep, untouched by birthdays, seasons, or laughter. Until one quiet evening, when a nurse's routine check turned everything upside down. It was a Tuesday when Nurse Carla first noticed it. She'd been adjusting Evelyn's blanket, smoothing the corners, when her hand hesitated over her abdomen. There was a firmness that hadn't been there before, a slight curve under the sheet. Carla frowned. At first, she thought it might be bloating or a side effect of medication, but something about the shape made her uneasy. "Could be nothing," she muttered, but her instincts told her otherwise. She leaned closer, pressing her fingers gently around the area. No gas, no hard mass. This was different. Her breath caught. "No," she whispered. She checked Evelyn's file, rereading notes, vital signs, weight history. Nothing explained this. Her heart pounded. She called Dr. Min Patel, the night shift physician, who arrived groggy and skeptical. "Probably fluid retention," he yawned, stepping inside. But as soon as his hands examined Evelyn's belly, his demeanor shifted. "Get an ultrasound," he ordered immediately. Now. Within an hour, the results came in. Evelyn Morrow, 24 years old, comatose for 5 years, was 6 months pregnant. The news spread like a lightning bolt through the corridors of Ashton Grace. Carla stood frozen in the break room, whispering to herself, "What have they done to you, sweetheart?" Miriam Morrow sat in stunned silence as Dr. Patel relayed the findings the next morning. Her eyes widened with each word, her lips trembling, her hands clutched tight around her rosary. "That's impossible," she whispered. "She's been unconscious for 5 years. How can she be?" Her voice cracked and faded. Dr. Patel knelt beside her, his voice heavy. "We're launching an immediate investigation. There's no medical explanation for this. Someone did this to her." Talia, standing in the hallway, heard every word. Her eyes burned, her fists clenched. "No," she muttered. "This can't be real." But it was, and in that moment, everything changed. Evelyn's coma was no longer the tragedy of a girl lost in time. It was now the epicenter of a crime committed in silence against a woman who couldn't scream. The hospital staff gathered in shocked murmurs. The police were notified. A list of everyone who had entered room 312 over the years was prepared. And in the midst of the chaos, Evelyn remained silent, her body now a battleground for truth, vengeance, and justice yet to come. The moment the ultrasound confirmed what no one dared to believe, Ashton Grace Hospital transformed from a place of quiet routine into a storm of whispered horror. The administrative staff scrambled to contain the leak, but it was too late. Within hours, news of Evelyn Morrow's inexplicable pregnancy spread across every hallway, nurse station, and physician lounge. The very idea that a comatose patient, unresponsive for 5 years, could be 6 months pregnant was unthinkable, medically impossible unless someone had violated her. The hospital's director, Dr. Charles Lowell, called an emergency meeting with the heads of every department. He stood at the center of the conference room, his face pale, lips tight. "This is not just a breach of protocol," he said, his voice low but sharp as glass. "This is a criminal act." Around him, the gathered doctors and administrators exchanged glances laced with fear. confusion, and denial. "No one is above suspicion," he continued. "Until we find who is responsible, every member of staff with access to room 403 is to be thoroughly investigated." His tone carried no warmth. "If any of you have something to confess or contribute, now is the time. Silence will not protect you anymore." But the room remained painfully still. Detectives Luis Malden and Sarah Reyes arrived at Ashton Grace the next morning, both seasoned professionals who had seen the worst of humanity. But even they were stunned by the details of the case. Malden, a tall, grizzled man with graying temples and an ever-burning cigarette between his lips, leaned against the nurse's station with a sigh. "A girl in a coma gets pregnant," he muttered, scanning the staff list. "Jesus." Reyes, younger and sharper, with eyes that missed nothing, flipped through the preliminary hospital access logs. "Room 403's traffic is a mess," she said. 12 nurses, 4 physicians, a neurologist, custodians, all in the last 6 months. We've got a long road ahead. Their first order of business was to speak with Nurse Carla Davenport, the woman who discovered Evelyn's condition. She met them in the conference room, visibly shaken, her hands fidgeting in her lap. "I noticed the swelling 2 nights ago," she explained, her voice barely above a whisper. "At first I thought it might be gas or some kind of fluid retention, but then I realized it had shape, form." Reyes leaned forward. "Did you ever notice anyone entering room 403 who shouldn't have?" Carla hesitated, glancing at the mirror behind them as if expecting someone to be watching. Then, in a breathless rush, she said, "Dr. Renshaw, the neurologist. He visited her often, always during the night." The name sent ripples through the hospital. Dr. Harlan Renshaw was a respected neurologist, quiet and intense, known for his meticulous patient care and unsociable nature. Most chalked it up to his intellectual temperament, but others had long whispered about how he preferred working nights and avoided casual interaction. When Malden and Reyes reviewed the hospital's visitor logs, they found that Dr. Renshaw had indeed accessed room 403 more frequently than any other doctor, often at hours when no scheduled procedures or checks were necessary. Reyes raised an eyebrow as she traced the timestamps with her pen. 14 unscheduled entries in the past 2 months alone, she said, always between 11 p.m. and 3 a.m., and no notes entered in the medical record afterward. Malden exhaled slowly, his cigarette burning down. "That's not a doctor following up," he said darkly. "That's a man covering tracks." They requested hospital surveillance footage from those nights, but when the IT department attempted to retrieve the files, they found something even more disturbing. The footage for room 403 during those windows had been deleted. All of it. No backups, no copies. Reyes turned toward the tech specialist, her voice steel. "Who has access to delete footage?" The reply was immediate. "Only high-level admins and Dr. Renshaw." Meanwhile, in a secluded corner of the neurology department, Dr. Renshaw sat in his office, seemingly unfazed by the unfolding chaos. His blinds were drawn, his computer screen casting an eerie glow against his pale face. He sipped coffee slowly, methodically, as if savoring each moment. A knock interrupted his stillness. Nurse Carla stepped inside, her expression unreadable. "The police are here," she said. Renshaw turned his head slightly. "So, I've heard." He didn't ask what they wanted. "They're reviewing surveillance records," she added, testing the waters. He didn't blink. "They won't find anything useful," he replied smoothly, almost too smoothly. "Patients' privacy is a delicate matter. We've always respected that." Carla stared at him, uncertain whether to flee or confront. Renshaw's eyes met hers, calm, composed, empty. "Go back to your rounds, Nurse Davenport," he said softly, but with an undertone of warning. She left without another word. Behind her, the door clicked shut. Renshaw leaned back, tapping his fingers against the desk. He knew the investigation was narrowing. He had hoped it would take longer, but he had prepared for this, carefully, meticulously. The question wasn't whether they'd suspect him. The question was whether they could prove it. Downstairs, Dr. Lowell convened a second emergency meeting with the hospital's legal counsel and security team. The tone was no longer one of internal review. It was full-blown crisis mode. "If it's true that Renshaw had the means to delete footage," Lowell said, "then we're facing not just medical malpractice but criminal conspiracy. We could be liable. The hospital's attorney Gregory Ames leaned forward, adjusting his glasses. We need to cooperate fully with law enforcement. But we also need to start distancing the hospital legally, now. Public perception will destroy us otherwise. Security Chief Ellen Bishop added, if Renshaw suspects he's being targeted, he might try to disappear. We need to monitor his movements. Reyes, now present in the meeting, nodded in agreement. We need access to his office, computer and any devices. Also, interviews with every nurse, janitor and physician who has been on shift during the nights in question. Malden, still smoking, flicked his ash into a cup. Someone saw something. They always do. The trick is getting them to talk. Outside the room, whispers circulated like wildfire among the staff. Nurses glanced over their shoulders, doctors avoided eye contact, and every hallway felt heavier than it had the day before. The silence Evelyn had slept through for 5 years was finally being broken, but what it was uncovering was far more disturbing than anyone had imagined. In the cafeteria, the atmosphere was tense. Nurses sat in clusters, speaking in low, urgent tones. "Did you hear what Carla said?" one whispered. "About Dr. Renshaw?" Another nurse, younger and visibly shaken, nodded. "He always gave me chills. I once passed by room 403 during a night shift and heard him talking, but no one else was there." They fell silent when Valerie, one of the senior RNs, sat down with her tray. "If any of you know something," she said, voice stern but not unkind, "you need to speak now. This isn't just gossip anymore. This is a crime." The young nurse lowered her head. "I was afraid," she whispered. "Afraid no one would believe me." Valerie reached across the table. "We believe you now, and we need your help." At that moment, across the hospital, Evelyn lay still, her body the battleground of an unspeakable violation, her voice locked somewhere deep inside a coma. Yet even in silence, she had stirred the conscience of an institution. Secrets buried in the sterile quiet were beginning to raise. And outside, behind a closed office door, Dr. Renshaw checked his passport drawer, already considering where to run if the truth finally came for him. The sterile air in Ashton Grace Hospital grew heavier with every passing hour as the police cordoned off access to room 403 and the forensic team arrived to collect DNA samples. Evelyn Morrow's condition remained unchanged, but now the child growing within her womb had become the focal point of a far darker narrative. Detective Malden stood by the window of the lab wing, watching rain tap gently against the glass as he waited for the samples to be processed. "This place feels cursed," he muttered to Reyes, who stood beside him, arms folded. 5 years asleep and now this. Reyes didn't respond. Her eyes remained fixed on the lab door, where a red light signaled that analysis was underway. Behind those doors, 2 forensic technicians moved methodically, one drawing samples from Evelyn's blood and cheek, another isolating fetal DNA through amniocentesis under Dr. Patel's supervision. The tension in the hospital was palpable. Nurses whispered in corridors, administrators held hushed meetings behind closed doors, and Dr. Lowell paced like a man with everything to lose. No one dared to say it aloud, but all eyes were on one man, Dr. Harlan Renshaw. And soon, the blood would either confirm or destroy the suspicions swirling around him. 3 days passed before the results were delivered. Inside the hospital's administrative boardroom, the detectives, Dr. Lowell, and a forensics liaison named Eric Nolan, gathered to review the file. Carla was also present, her hands trembling in her lap, her expression taut with fear and fury. Eric placed the manila folder on the table with solemn finality. "The fetal DNA matches the profile of Dr. Harlan Renshaw," he announced, voice neutral, almost clinical. "Probability of paternity exceeds 99.999%. Silence dropped like a guillotine in the room. Dr. Lowell's face turned pale, a sheen of sweat breaking over his brow. Carla inhaled sharply, covering her mouth with both hands. Malden leaned back, exhaling with a grim shake of his head. "Well, there it is," he muttered. "We've got him." Reyes didn't move. She simply stared at the folder as if it might burn a hole in the table. "We need to confront him. Now." But Lowell raised a hand, his voice trembling. "Wait. We need to handle this carefully. He'll lawyer up the moment we speak to him." "Let him," Malden growled. We have the damn DNA. Let him try to wriggle out. The room had shifted from suspicion to silent confirmation. Evelyn hadn't just been violated. She had been violated by one of their own. Within an hour, Dr. Renshaw was summoned to the boardroom. He entered with his usual clinical calm, though a flicker of calculation passed through his eyes when he noticed the presence of police. "You called for me?" he asked, his voice even, his gaze settling on Lowell. "Take a seat," Malden said bluntly, nodding toward the empty chair across from him. Renshaw sat, slowly, folding his hands on the table. Reyes slid the folder toward him. "DNA results," she said. "They confirm you're the biological father of Evelyn Morrow's unborn child." Renshaw looked down at the file, but didn't open it. He blinked once, twice, then lifted his eyes. "That's impossible," he said flatly. "Your tests are flawed, or forged." Carla stood abruptly, fury flaring in her chest. "Liar!" she shouted. "You were in her room, night after night." Dr. Lowell motioned for her to sit, but said nothing. Renshaw's expression did not shift. "I want my lawyer," he said calmly. "I will not say another word without counsel present." Reyes nodded. "Fine. We expected that." As Renshaw stood to leave, escorted by security, Malden whispered to Reyes, "He's not panicking." She nodded grimly. "That means he still thinks he has control." News of the DNA results hit the hospital like a lightning bolt. Staff members stared at one another with a mixture of disbelief and disgust. Some cried openly. Others remained in stunned silence. In the family waiting room, Miriam Morrow was told the truth. Dr. Lowell, flanked by the detectives, gently handed her a copy of the results. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Morrow," he said, his voice thick with regret. Miriam didn't cry at first. She sat in the chair, stiff and unmoving, reading the name on the report, Harlan Renshaw, paternal match, confirmed. Her fingers tightened around the paper until it crumpled in her grip. "He was her doctor," she whispered. "He was supposed to protect her." Talia stood beside her, trembling, then sank to her knees and wrapped her arms around Miriam. "We're going to make him pay," she said, her voice shaking. "I promise you." The family was now fully aware. The hospital administration tried to offer reassurances, but their voices rang hollow. Outside room 403, Evelyn remained as she had for years, still, silent, unaware. But now, her body carried proof of a horror so vile, it had shattered the illusion of safety inside those hospital walls. Dr. Renshaw's lawyer, Marcus Delroy, arrived within hours. A high-profile defense attorney known for his ruthlessness in the courtroom, Delroy wasted no time. He filed a preliminary motion challenging the DNA test, citing possible contamination and procedural errors. He also requested a full forensic audit of the lab, stalling for time. "You have no physical evidence tying Dr. Renshaw to any misconduct," Delroy told reporters during a brief press appearance. "No video, no eyewitness testimony, no confessions. This is trial by speculation, and we will not tolerate it." Inside the hospital, tensions reached a boiling point. Nurses began refusing night shifts near room 403. Staff whispered about quitting. Dr. Lowell was summoned by the hospital board to explain how such a breach could occur under his watch. And in the police station, Malden punched a locker in frustration. "The bastard's going to walk," he growled. "Even with the DNA." Reyes paced behind him, thinking. "Not if we find more," she said. "Not if there's something left behind that he forgot to cover. But where?" Every surveillance file during those suspicious nights had been wiped clean. And yet, sometimes, even ghosts leave footprints. That night, unable to sleep and with her conscience screaming, Nurse Carla returned to the basement archives. She remembered something, an older backup system used before the new security upgrade 2 years ago. It had been decommissioned but not destroyed. Carla found the cabinet in the corner of the server room, its blinking lights faint but alive. Her hands shook as she typed in access credentials and searched for room 403. Dozens of errors of messages popped up. Deleted files, missing timestamps. Then, one file loaded. It was grainy, time-stamped from 18 months prior. The footage showed a hallway, empty, until a figure entered the frame. Dr. Renshaw. He paused outside Evelyn's door, glanced around, then entered. Timestamp, 2:41 a.m. The file cut off shortly after. Carla gasped. You son of a... She downloaded the file to a USB drive, her breath short, her heart racing. At 6 a.m., she walked into the precinct, placed the drive in Reyes's hand and said, "This isn't everything, but it's enough." He was there. Reyes looked at the screen, at the shadowy figure slipping into room 403. "Now," she whispered, "we've got teeth." Within days of the DNA revelation and the emergence of the partial surveillance video, Ashton Grace Hospital was no longer a sanctuary of healing, but a battlefield of opinion, fear, and outrage. The once sterile corridors echoed with whispers and raised voices. Some medical staff, particularly those who had worked closely with Dr. Renshaw, refused to believe he could be capable of such a monstrous crime. "He's always been meticulous, dedicated," said Dr. Emery, a cardiologist who had shared rotations with him. "I refuse to believe this until I see a full confession." Others, however, were forgiving. "Dedicated men don't erase surveillance footage," muttered Nurse Valerie, as she pulled files from a cabinet. Staff lounges turned into debate chambers. Friendships fractured. A memo from Dr. Lowell urging unity only deepened the divide. "We will not allow conjecture to destroy years of trust among our staff," it read, but few paid attention. Outside the hospital, the media had caught wind of the story. Camera crews lined the front entrance. Headlines began to circulate. Sleeping beauty horror, comatose patient 6 months pregnant, doctor accused in shocking assault. Evelyn, lying unconscious in room 403, became a national symbol, one of grief, violation, and the failure of a system meant to protect. Inside the hospital's upper administration offices, Marcus Delroy sat across from Renshaw, his expression unreadable behind designer glasses. "They're circling," he said, flatly, tapping the edge of a legal pad. "The moment they get corroborating witness testimony, it's over. That video is already damaging, even if partial." Renshaw, calm but tight-lipped, stared at the wall. "Then it can't be allowed to happen," he replied. Delroy sighed. "You knew this was risky. Now they have the DNA, a video, and if even one staff member flips..." Renshaw interrupted, voice low and venomous. "They won't. Not unless they want to lose everything." He stood, walking toward his desk, opening a hidden drawer behind several medical reference books. Inside was a list of names, nurses, interns, night staff, alongside bank deposits and codes. "Everyone on this list has something to lose, and they know it." Delroy raised an eyebrow. "You bribed them?" Renshaw's lips curled. "Let's just say they owe me." Delroy didn't flinch. "Regardless, we need to prepare for exit. There's a flight leaving for Zurich on Thursday. I can have new identification ready by tomorrow. But we need to destroy any remaining records that tie you to Evelyn's case, especially manual logs, old backups, and janitorial access schedules." Renshaw nodded. "I'll take care of it tonight." That same evening, Marvin Briggs, an aging janitor who had worked at Ashton Grace for over 15 years, made his way through the sublevels of the hospital carrying a stack of file boxes. He had been instructed by Dr. Renshaw to deliver them to the incinerator chute, a place rarely monitored and perfect for erasing evidence. As he descended the narrow staircase, his hand trembled slightly, sweat collecting beneath his cap. He paused in front of the secured maintenance room where archived logs were stored. As he entered his key code, a voice behind him startled him. "Marvin?" It was Chief Ellen Bishop, security director. Her eyes narrowed as she stepped into the corridor. "What are you doing down here after hours?" Marvin stammered, the boxes shaking in his grip. "Just, routine disposal." Dr. Lowell said. "Dr. Lowell signed off on nothing," Bishop snapped. She radioed for backup as Marvin's shoulders slumped. Within minutes, Detectives Malden and Reyes were on site. In a small interrogation room upstairs, Marvin finally broke. "I didn't want to do it," he whispered, his voice quivering. "But he threatened me. Said he'd ruin me, get my pension revoked, tell people I was stealing morphine. I didn't even know the girl was pregnant until it hit the news. He told me to erase logs, move files. I didn't know how deep it went." Reyes leaned in, placing a hand on the table between them. "Marvin, listen carefully. You need to tell us everything. Dates, times, names. We can protect you, but only if you help us put him away." Marvin nodded, tears welling in his eyes. "It started about 2 years ago. Renshaw would come in late, always carrying a black duffel. Said he needed privacy for specialized testing. I was told to disable the hallway cameras. At first I thought it was just unusual procedure, but then he started asking for favors, moving things, cleaning up, signing logs under other staff IDs. When I hesitated, he'd remind me I had grandkids, that he knew where they went to school. Malden furiously scribbled every word. Did he ever mention Evelyn? By name? Marvin nodded slowly. She was Subject 3 on his files. I thought it was part of some neurology research. I swear I didn't know. The confession was enough. Coupled with the surveillance footage, DNA test, and digital records of payment transfers, the detectives had built a solid case. We'll get you a deal, Reyes assured him. You've done the right thing. Marvin looked down at his calloused hands as if ashamed. I should have done it sooner, he said, voice cracking. The next morning, before the sun had fully risen over Darlington, the warrant was signed. A tactical unit moved in silently through the back entrance of Ashton Grace. Delroy had just arrived with Renshaw's forged passport when they were intercepted. Officers surrounded them in the physician's parking lot. Renshaw stood, briefcase in hand, eyes cold and unflinching, as Detective Reyes approached with the arrest warrant. Dr. Harlan Renshaw, she declared. You are under arrest for the sexual assault of Evelyn Morrow, destruction of evidence, and obstruction of justice. For the first time, a flicker of panic broke through Renshaw's carefully maintained composure. This is a mistake, he said sharply. I demand to see the charges. You'll see them at arraignment, Malden cut in, pulling out the cuffs. Delroy raised a hand. My client will not be saying anything without legal counsel present. He's said enough, Reyes muttered, as she read Renshaw his rights. Staff stood by the windows of the hospital, watching as he was escorted into the police vehicle. Some gasped, others cheered. Dr. Lowell, who stood silently on the 4th floor, closed his eyes. He had once trusted Renshaw. Now that trust had nearly destroyed them all. And in room 403, Evelyn remained motionless, her mind unaware of the storm that had finally broken outside her sealed world. Machines beeped rhythmically around her. Talia sat beside her, holding her hand. He's gone, she whispered, tears trailing down her cheeks. He won't hurt anyone again. Evelyn didn't stir. Her eyes stayed closed. But as Talia leaned in to press her forehead against Evelyn's, a faint pulse flickered on the monitor. A subtle change, a whisper beneath the silence. The storm had passed, but the road to healing had only just begun. The halls of Ashton Grace Hospital had never been so quiet. After the dramatic arrest of Dr. Harlan Renshaw, a strange stillness fell over the facility. The media had been forced back behind makeshift barriers, but their presence was still felt in the tension that hovered like a fog over every interaction. Inside room 403, however, time continued its delicate dance. Evelyn Morrow lay in her bed, pale and fragile, the steady rhythm of the heart monitor the only sign of life. Her mother, Miriam, remained at her side, refusing to leave, sleeping in a chair that had long molded itself to her exhaustion. Talia Cross, Evelyn's lifelong friend, had taken leave from her job just to be there every day. On this particular morning, the sun filtered through half-closed blinds, casting a warm glow across the floor. As the soft hum of machines filled the room, something different happened. Evelyn's fingers twitched. It was barely perceptible, more reflex than intent, but it was enough. Miriam, bleary-eyed from a sleepless night, noticed. Her breath hitched in her throat. She reached out, grasping her daughter's hand with trembling fingers. "Evelyn," she whispered. The monitor's rhythm shifted. Another twitch, another stir. It was as if the silence that had gripped her daughter for 5 years had finally begun to break. The doctors were called in immediately. Dr. Patel, who had taken over Evelyn's case after Renshaw's removal, entered with cautious hope in his eyes. He checked her, vitals, pupils, reflexes, all while speaking to her gently. "Evelyn, if you can hear me, squeeze my hand." Nothing. A long pause. Then, a faint pressure. Talia gasped, covering her mouth. "She's in there," she whispered. Miriam sobbed silently, unable to speak. Patel nodded. "This isn't full consciousness yet," he explained. "But we're entering a transitional phase. She's fighting to wake up." Over the next hours, Evelyn began showing more signs. small eye movements, faint shifts in her limbs. By nightfall, the moment everyone prayed for arrived. Her eyelids fluttered. Her eyes opened slowly, painfully, as if the weight of years was resisting the light. She blinked several times, her gaze unfocused, darting across the room. The brightness overwhelmed her. She tried to speak, but only a dry, broken sound escaped her lips. "Get water," Miriam cried. Talia rushed forward with a straw. Evelyn sipped, wincing. Her lips trembled. "Mom?" she croaked. Miriam collapsed into sobs. "I'm here, baby. I'm here. You're safe." But Evelyn's eyes scanned the room again. Confusion etched into her face. Her brow furrowed, hands slowly drifting toward her own body. And then she touched her belly. The shock of it tore through her like lightning. Evelyn's hand rested atop the unnatural swell of her abdomen. Her breath caught. Her gaze dropped in disbelief. What is this?" she whispered, voice hoarse, barely audible. Panic flooded her features. Why am I?" She struggled to sit, her weak limbs failing her. "What happened to me?" Miriam reached out to hold her, but Evelyn recoiled, her voice rising in panic. "No! What happened?" The machines beeped louder, registering her distress. Talia tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. Dr. Patel stepped in, his voice calm, but firm. "Evelyn, listen to me. You've been in a coma for 5 years." Evelyn froze. "No," she whispered. "That's not possible." Patel continued. "You were in an accident. A truck. You survived, but we didn't know if you'd ever wake up. You've just woken up. But there's more you need to understand." Evelyn shook her head, tears streaming. "No, this isn't real." Her hands clutched the sheets, her body shaking. "Who did this? Why am I?" She stopped herself. Her breath became erratic. And then, in a voice so quiet it was almost lost in the chaos, she said, He was here. At night. I remember." The room fell silent. Dr. Patel stepped closer. "Evelyn," he said gently, "do you remember who it was?" Her hands trembled as they clutched her belly. Her eyes, glazed with tears, began to focus as memories flickered across her mind like shattered glass reassembling. A voice, smell, a presence in the dark. "He touched me," she said, her voice hollow. "I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. I was floating, but I felt everything." Her words were fragmented, broken, but clear enough. "He came into the room. He whispered. He said I belonged to him." Miriam began sobbing, unable to contain her grief. Talia stood behind her, stunned and still. "Evelyn," Dr. Patel said, barely above a whisper, "do you know who he was?" Evelyn's lips quivered. Her breathing quickened. She stared ahead, haunted. "Renshaw," she finally said. It was Dr. Renshaw. Her body shook as the name left her mouth, and then she burst into tears. The weight of trauma, of stolen years, of a life defiled and denied crashed down on her. Miriam embraced her daughter tightly, whispering, "You're safe now. You're safe." But nothing could erase the truth now spoken aloud. The forbidden name had been set free. Later that evening, Detectives Malden and Reyes arrived at the hospital to hear the testimony firsthand. Evelyn, though emotionally battered and physically drained, agreed to speak. She sat propped up on pillows, her voice raspy, her eyes rimmed with shadows of pain. Reyes spoke. "First, Evelyn, what you're doing takes courage. You don't have to tell us everything today, just what you remember." Evelyn nodded faintly. "I didn't know what was real or imagined, but now I know. I remember being touched when I couldn't move. I heard his voice, smelled his cologne. He always came after midnight. I thought I was dreaming, but it wasn't a dream." Malden jotted notes, his jaw tense. "We have the DNA, Evelyn," he said softly. "We have the video, your testimony. It completes the chain." Evelyn looked down at her belly, then back up at him. "Will he go to prison?" she asked. "He already has," Reyes answered. "But your words will make sure he never leaves." Evelyn closed her eyes, tears spilling silently. "Then yes," she said. "I'll testify. I'll tell them everything." The detectives nodded and quietly left the room. In their silence, they carried the weight of her truth. In Evelyn's voice, the system had found its missing witness. And in that fragile resolve, justice had found its first breath. In the days that followed, Evelyn's recovery became a symbol of something greater. News of her awakening spread quickly, and public interest surged once more. But inside the hospital, it was not a media event. It was a sacred space of healing. Evelyn slowly began to piece her mind back together. Dr. Patel worked closely with therapists to help her process the trauma, and Talia never left her side. Miriam stayed strong, though her eyes never seemed to stop, brimming with tears, of sorrow, of gratitude, of rage at what had been done to her daughter. As Evelyn touched her belly now, she didn't recoil. Instead, she asked softly, "What happens to the baby?" No one had a clear answer yet, but one thing was certain. Evelyn had reclaimed her voice, and as she gazed through the window of room 403, once a prison, now a gateway to recovery, she whispered to herself, "He won't define me." For the first time in 5 years, her future was her own. The courtroom was nothing like Evelyn had imagined it in the long, silent years of her coma. It was colder, harsher. The walls were not the deep mahogany of courtroom dramas, but pale gray, sterile, much like the hospital room that had become her prison. She sat in the front row behind the prosecution table, flanked by her mother, Miriam, and Talia, both of whom refused to leave her side. Across the room, dressed in a tailored gray suit and perfectly polished shoes, sat Dr. Harlan Renshaw. The man who had once stood over her hospital bed in the darkness now sat with his face impassive. Chin high, eyes devoid of remorse. The cameras had been barred from the courtroom, but the media buzz outside the building was relentless. Reporters screamed updates into microphones, sketch artists flurried across notebooks, and headlines blared across every major network. Doctor accused of assaulting comatose patient faces trial. The entire nation had its eyes on Darlington, but for Evelyn, this wasn't a public reckoning. It was personal. Every breath she took was a battle against the anxiety clawing at her chest. She was here not for fame or vengeance, but for truth, for the girl she had once been, for the woman she refused to let him steal. Opening statements began, and the defense wasted no time in setting the tone. Marcus Delroy, Renshaw's high-powered attorney, rose smoothly and addressed the jury with confident poise. "Ladies and gentlemen, what we are dealing with here is tragedy, yes, but not criminal intent. Dr. Renshaw is a man of science, a healer. He is being persecuted not because of what he's done, but because of what others want to believe." He gestured toward Evelyn with a performative solemnity. "The young woman has endured a horrible accident, a coma, and now, in a state of psychological confusion, she is being manipulated into believing that Dr. Renshaw, her attending physician, was responsible for her pregnancy. But memories from comatose states are unreliable. The science proves this. The defense will show that her mind, desperate to make sense of trauma, latched onto a name, a face, familiar to her from years of silent exposure. The jurors shifted in their seats, some skeptical, others visibly moved. Evelyn lowered her head, jaw clenched. Delroy continued, "There is no physical evidence of coercion, no witness to any assault. The DNA may prove paternity, yes, but not intent, not consent, not violation." When he sat down, the silence in the room was razor sharp. The stage had been set, but the prosecution was ready. District Attorney Simone Herrera stood next, a woman of striking presence and unwavering conviction. She looked directly at the jury, then at Evelyn, then at the defendant. Dr. Renshaw used his position, his knowledge, and his unchecked access to violate the most sacred trust between a doctor and a patient, she began. Evelyn Morrow could not consent. She could not resist. She could not speak, and yet he treated her body as if it belonged to him. Her voice did not rise, but it carried force. "This case is not just about what happened behind a closed hospital door. It is about the arrogance of a man who believed his intelligence, his reputation, and his connections would protect him from justice. But no one is above the law." She presented the partial surveillance footage, grainy but clear enough to show Renshaw entering Evelyn's room at 2:41 a.m. when no procedure had been scheduled. She played the audio of Marvin Briggs's confession, played the clip where the janitor wept as he admitted to being threatened into deleting logs. "And then," Herrera said, lifting the DNA report into the air, "there is the science, unforged, unfalsified, unassailable. Dr. Renshaw is the father of Evelyn Morrow's unborn child. The courtroom felt like it stopped breathing. Evelyn was called to testify on the third day. The moment she stood, a hush fell across the room. Her steps were measured and careful, her body still frail from the years in coma and the months of recovery. But her spine was straight. Her eyes did not waver as she passed Renshaw. For the first time, she looked directly at the man who had haunted her from the edges of fragmented nightmares and whispered terror. She took the stand, hands trembling as she was sworn in. "Miss Morrow," Herrera began gently, "we understand how difficult this is. Please take your time." Evelyn nodded slowly, breathing deeply. "Do you remember what happened to you while you were in the coma?" Herrera asked. Evelyn's lips parted, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Not at first. Everything was like shadows, sounds, but over time, pieces came back." She paused. "I couldn't move, couldn't speak, but I could feel." The jury leaned in, enraptured. "He would come at night," Evelyn said. "He spoke to me, said I was his, that no one would know. I couldn't scream." She turned toward Renshaw, her voice growing stronger. "I remember the voice. It was his." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Evelyn wept, but she didn't break. Delroy rose, feigning sympathy. "Miss Morrow," he said, "is it possible your memories were influenced by what you were told after you woke up?" Evelyn didn't blink. "No, you had no visual confirmation," he pressed. "Just a voice, a presence. After 5 years, how can you be certain?" Evelyn leaned forward. "Because when someone violates you while you're paralyzed, their voice becomes a prison. You never forget the voice of your captor." Her words echoed through the chamber like a judgment from a higher court. Delroy faltered, then sat. Herrera stood again. "No further questions, Your Honor." The judge nodded and dismissed Evelyn with gratitude in his eyes. She stepped down slowly, supported by Talia's waiting arms. That night, her testimony aired across every network. Commentators praised her courage. Survivors from across the country reached out online. And somewhere, behind prison glass, Renshaw sat stone-faced, knowing the tide had turned. On the final day of the trial, the jury deliberated for just under 4 hours. When they returned, the room was breathless. The foreman stood, holding the verdict. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Dr. Harlan Renshaw, guilty on all counts: sexual assault of a vulnerable patient, falsification of hospital records, and professional misconduct." A collective gasp burst from the audience. Renshaw showed no emotion. The judge's voice thundered, "Dr. Harlan Renshaw, you are hereby sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole." Miriam wept openly. Talia clung to Evelyn's hand. The courtroom erupted in applause from those who had prayed for justice. Evelyn closed her eyes, not in relief, but in quiet solemnity. Her voice had been heard. The mask had shattered. The predator had fallen. And now, at last, the healing could begin. The weeks following the trial moved slowly for Evelyn, like a fog lifting one thin layer at a time. Though justice had been served and Renshaw was behind bars, the heaviness inside her did not dissipate overnight. Every sound in the hallway still made her flinch. Every white coat that passed her door made her chest tighten. She had been released from the hospital under supervised care, moving into a private wing arranged through a victims' rehabilitation program. Her body was healing faster than her mind, but the progress was visible. She walked now with assistance, spoke with more clarity, and had even taken short steps outdoors. Yet none of those victories felt complete, because the hardest part was not the recovery from what had been done to her. It was what remained within her. She stood in front of the mirror one morning, wrapped in a hospital-issued robe, staring at the roundness of her belly. Her fingers traced the curve, hesitant. This child, this life, had come from darkness. How could something so innocent be born of something so vile? Her thoughts swirled in chaos. She didn't know if she could love the child. She didn't know if she could look into its eyes without hearing Renshaw's voice in her mind. Talia visited daily, never missing a moment to sit by Evelyn's side, even when Evelyn said little or nothing. On one such afternoon, Evelyn broke the silence. "Do you think it's possible to raise a child like this and not feel resentment?" she asked, her voice distant, Talia looked up from the book she had been pretending to read. "I think," she said softly, "that you're one of the strongest people I know. And if anyone can find a way to raise that child with love instead of pain, it's you." Evelyn swallowed hard. "But what if I see him in the baby? What if I can't separate them?" Talia placed her hand on Evelyn's. "Then you let yourself feel everything. You grieve, you rage, you cry, but you don't let that pain decide who the child is. He didn't choose this. Neither did you." Evelyn nodded, tears welling up. It wasn't a magical cure, but it planted something. An idea that maybe this story didn't have to end where the trauma began. That night, Evelyn lay awake for hours, her hand resting gently on her stomach, listening to the rhythm of the baby's movements. It wasn't comfort, not yet, but it wasn't hatred either. Detective Malden came by the following week, not for an official statement, but to check in. His gruff demeanor had softened since the trial, especially when it came to Evelyn. He brought her a stack of letters from survivors around the country, people who had watched her testimony and found courage in it. "You're stronger than you think," he told her, placing the bundle on her table. "You reminded a lot of people they're not alone." Evelyn flipped through the letters slowly, each one raw and heartfelt. A woman in Arizona wrote about her own hospital assault. A teenager from Oregon spoke of a foster system abuser. Evelyn read until her hands trembled. "They all carry this," she whispered, her eyes red. Malden nodded. "And they carry it because no one ever told them it was okay to speak." Evelyn's gaze turned to her belly again. "I don't want to raise this child in silence. If I do keep it, it has to be with truth." Malden stood. "Then start there." It was a simple phrase, but it stayed with her. That evening, Evelyn asked for an ultrasound appointment. She needed to see the baby, to see if there was something in this small being that she could claim as hers, not Renshaw's. The following day, Evelyn sat in the dimly lit ultrasound room, her heart pounding harder than it had during the trial. Dr. Lowell performed the scan himself, moving the wand gently over her abdomen. The screen flickered, then brightened, revealing the tiny figure curled inside. There it was, undeniably human, undeniably alive. Evelyn's breath hitched as she watched the heartbeat flutter. Dr. Lowell smiled gently, saying nothing, giving her space to absorb it. Talia sat beside her, squeezing her hand. Evelyn stared at the image, her thoughts a mess of fear, awe, and disbelief. "It's just a baby," she whispered. "Not a symbol, not a reminder, just a baby." For the first time since waking, she smiled, small, hesitant, but real. "It has my chin," she murmured, her eyes shimmering. Talia leaned in. "See? That's yours, not his." Evelyn let herself believe it, even if only for a moment. It wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't healing, but it was a beginning. She asked for a printout of the image and held it in her hands like it was made of glass. The child inside her had no voice yet, no past, only a future waiting to be written, and she had the pen. That night, alone in her room with a soft lamp burning beside her, Evelyn opened a fresh journal. She stared at the blank page for a long time before writing. "To the child growing inside me," she began, "you came from something cruel, but that isn't your fault. That isn't who you are. I don't know yet what you'll become, or if I'm strong enough to be what you need, but I promise you this, I will never lie to you. I will never let shame write your story. You'll know where you came from, but more importantly, you'll know where you're going." She paused, tears falling silently as the words formed. "You are not a shadow. You are a new light. And if I can teach you anything, it will be how to walk forward even when the world tries to pull you down. With truth, with courage, with love." She signed it simply, "Mom," then closed the book and held it to her chest. For the first time, she felt the stirrings of a different kind of strength, not born from defiance or survival, but from something more enduring. She wasn't just a victim anymore. She was becoming a mother. Evelyn continued to write each day. Some entries were angry, others heartbreaking, and many simply uncertain, but they were honest. She documented her nightmares and her fragile hopes, her bitterness and her blooming affection. She began keeping a second journal too, one not for the child, but for herself. In it, she wrestled with the unspoken questions. Would the child resemble him? Could she handle public judgment? Would she ever truly feel normal again? But alongside those fears, something else grew, resilient, a quiet resolve. She began asking the social worker about parenting classes, requested a counselor to help her navigate postpartum trauma, and even reached out to other mothers who had carried children after assault. They didn't offer answers, but they offered solidarity. And Evelyn realized that sometimes healing wasn't a destination. It was a daily choice. One breath at a time, one letter at a time, one heartbeat at a time. The seasons began to change, and so did Evelyn. Spring melted into summer, and with each passing week, she walked a little farther, stood a little taller, and breathed a little deeper. She no longer flinched at sudden sounds or recoiled from white coats in hospital corridors. Her body still bore scars, some visible, some buried deep, but they no longer defined her. Her days were full in quiet, healing ways. She attended weekly support group meetings for survivors of sexual trauma, and at first, she sat in silence, simply listening. But one evening, when a young woman across the circle broke into sobs while recounting her assault by a professor, Evelyn finally spoke. "You're not weak," she said gently, her voice trembling but steady. "What happened to you wasn't your fault, and you don't owe the world your silence." The room had fallen into reverent hush. That night, several women approached her after the session. They thanked her, asked her to come again. The group leader invited her to co-facilitate sessions, and slowly, Evelyn's presence shifted from that of a quiet observer to a guide, one who had walked through darkness and returned with a lantern. The city of Darlington, once stunned by her story, now watched her transformation with awe. Evelyn's days were no longer dictated by hospital visits or therapy appointments. She took long walks in the park with her son nestled against her chest, wrapped in soft cotton, his breathing calm and rhythmic. Each step she took with him felt like reclaiming the earth beneath her feet. She had named him Noah, a name she chose after reading that it meant rest and comfort. In him, she had found both. He had her eyes, not Renshaw's, her dimpled chin, her grandmother's laugh, oddly enough. He was his own person, untainted by the origin of his conception. And Evelyn had made a choice, not just to raise him, but to raise him with intention, with integrity. "You were born from pain," she once whispered to him while rocking him to sleep, "but you will not live in its shadow." Those late nights with him, the quiet feedings, and the whispered lullabies became sacred. They didn't erase the past, but they filled the silence that once consumed her with new meaning. Her healing was not about forgetting. It was about building something beautiful, where the world had tried to leave only ruin. One morning, while strolling through Riverside Park with Noah nestled close, Evelyn spotted a familiar figure seated on a bench beneath a flowering jacaranda tree. It was Dr. Lowell. His posture was relaxed, his hands folded on his lap, watching the pond as ducks glided across the surface. She approached slowly. He turned as she neared, and a smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. "Evelyn," he said, rising. "You look—" He paused, as if searching for the right word. "Whole," she smiled back. "Closer to it, anyway." They sat, and for a moment, neither spoke. The breeze rustled through the leaves above them. "I wanted to apologize," Dr. Lowell said at last, "for not seeing it sooner, for not protecting you." Evelyn shook her head. "You did what you could with what you knew. It was him who chose evil, not you." He nodded, eyes glassy. "Still, I carry guilt." Evelyn looked at her son. "I used to carry only anger, but now I carry something else, too. Purpose." She told him about the support groups, about the letters she'd received, about the classes she'd begun taking online. "Psychology," she said, "with a focus in trauma recovery. I want to help other women like me, women who thought their voices didn't matter." Dr. Lowell listened, deeply moved. "You're becoming a lighthouse," he said, "not just surviving, but guiding others home." Evelyn's gaze softened. "That's the goal." They sat a while longer, talking about how justice was only the beginning, how healing wasn't linear, and how stories, especially painful ones, could be rewritten. As the sun rose higher, Noah stirred in her arms. She cradled him gently, pressing a kiss to his forehead. "He'll grow up knowing the truth," she said quietly. "Not to carry shame, but to carry clarity. He'll be raised with honesty, not fear. Doctor. Lowell stood, placing a hand on her shoulder. Whatever path he walks, Evelyn, he's lucky to start it with a mother like you. They parted ways with warmth between them, not of shared sorrow, but of shared resolve. Evelyn watched him disappear down the path, then looked at her son. Let's go home, she whispered. There's still work to do. Months passed, and autumn painted the city in hues of fire and gold. Evelyn's life blossomed into a rhythm of lectures, therapy groups, and motherhood. Her name began appearing in small community bulletins, then in statewide conferences. She never sought attention, but her voice carried weight. It wasn't loud, but it was clear, and people listened. One afternoon, she received a call from a local middle school. They were holding a wellness week and wanted her to speak about resilience, healing, and truth. Evelyn hesitated, standing in front of a room full of teenagers, some too young to understand, some old enough to be survivors themselves, was terrifying. But she agreed. The day arrived, and she stepped onto the auditorium stage, Noah asleep in a sling against her chest. The students quieted, watching her. She took a breath. 5 years ago, I went silent, she began. Not by choice, but by force. When I woke up, the world expected me to forget, to hide, but I didn't. I couldn't. She looked out over the sea of young faces. When the light goes out, the truth doesn't vanish. It whispers in the dark, and I chose to listen. The room was still, not out of confusion, but reverence. In that moment, Evelyn wasn't just a survivor. She was a voice of light. After her talk, a teacher approached her, tears in her eyes. You reached them, she said. You made them feel seen. Evelyn nodded, emotion brimming in her chest. Later, in the empty hallway, she stood before a wall covered in colorful notes the students had written to themselves and each other. One said, I'm not broken, just healing. Another, I will not be quiet anymore. Evelyn smiled, tears trailing down her cheeks. Noah stirred and opened his eyes. She kissed his forehead. This is why we speak, she whispered. Outside, the sun bathed the schoolyard in golden light, and Evelyn stepped into it, not as the girl who had once been silenced, but as the woman who had chosen to listen, to rise, and to lead others toward their own dawn. If this story moved you, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to Mr. Edwards' Tales, and let us know in the comments what you felt while watching. And if someone came to mind while you were watching, share this video with them. This is a story meant to be felt, remembered, and passed on.